Well, thanks so much for doing that interview, Nate. It actually was it exposed some of my biases because I think of herbalists and I don't immediately think of balanced, thoughtful, and rational.
Okay.
And this guy really he was all of those things while being, kind of also in the pants of like a little bit of an out there herbalist.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's clear from the conversation too. Like I'm often throwing out these questions kind of couched in a particular worldview.
You're trying to mess with him a little bit.
I'm just trying to corner him to like, okay, like you're this, right? And he's really, I wouldn't say evasive in a way that he's evading the question, but what he'll do is he'll package the answer. He gives it back to me almost as another question that like has me now questioning the whole frame of the original sort of how I put it to him. And I really appreciate Richard's nuance.
Yeah.
And what you said is balanced inquiry or sort of a balanced analysis of this stuff.
Yeah, he's just so reasonable. Especially when it comes to the COVID stuff where people are just so into getting into like the real extremes or like the mainline defense that anyone who doesn't follow every CDC recommendation is like hates science or the opposite.
Or the opposite.
All of it.
Yeah.
And he was just reasonable. And you can even hear it in the tone of his voice and the content that he'd like thought about it. And he wasn't having any reactions except to like a little bit bemused about some of the things.
So that's the hot take of the interview for me, was this line about, we're so opposed, we have so much resistance to drink this Kool-Aid being offered to us by this corrupt vaccine or a narrative or whatever the mainstream is. And then we turn around and drink this other bucket of Kool-Aid that's just coming from some other point on the landscape.
Yeah.
And that, in that process, for me, the takeaway, like you say, what's the takeaway that someone, some listener can find some jewel in here to apply? I think it's real critical thinking. And then even to apply critical thinking to your critical thinking. So, just to understand that we're all sort of filtering through this bias, like you said, and to just take a step back and look at, all sides to model Richard, or have Richard be a model for us in this really rational, balanced sort of process of inquiry. That we'd apply the same rigor that we apply to one side to the other side, no matter where our bias is.
Okay. So for you, after getting that direct transmission from him, did you find that affect how you approached your perspectives or lived your life in the weeks after that interview, either with the COVID stuff or anything else?
I'll do you one better. I'll do another layer of transparency there, because Richard is my herbalist.
Okay.
Yeah. And as you know, but our listeners may not know, that I recently had a whole dance with Lyme disease.
Yes.
That I never thought of myself as a Lyme disease having person. I always heard Lyme disease. When people had Lyme disease, I was like, oh yeah, you're Lyme disease. Okay. And I got it. I live up here in the woods now. I spend all my free time outside in the woods.
And it's an STD, right? Lyme disease.
It's an STD, yeah, that comes from ticks. So the ticks literally are just throbbing with sexual impulse. They're leaping out of the trees. They're microscopic.
Yeah.
They're the size, they fit on the head of a pin.
Yeah, and you were just cavalier about all the ticks that you interacted with.
I was. Yeah. I was a forest slut.
With no protection.
With zero protection. No shirt, just rolling in the underbrush, doing cold dips, skinny dipping.
Yeah.
Who knows what part of my body this tick worked its way into and gave me this spiroidal infection of Lyme disease. And it sucked, man. It sucked. I'll spare the listener all the details how it came on, but once it was on, it was like, okay, this is real. I didn't want to accept it. I went and got the blood panel. So I went and saw like a conventional doctor. I went and saw my primary care physician. They ordered the blood panels, came back with whatever a lot of Lyme is. It was just like off the charts. You got this thing. I was like, okay, accepted it. Did the round of antibiotics. Now, around that same time that I got the diagnosis, I called Richard. I had known him. I had never been his patient before, but I just kind of know him from circles here in New York. And I reached out to him, and he absolutely said, do the doxy, do the antibiotic. This is a case where that's something Western medicine has developed, where you're combating something that this is the right practice. This is the best practice. In fact, he said extend it. He said he actually extended the period because it's like a 21-day recommendation. He said it's not enough. So that was sort of my first taste of his approach. And then we talked about the biome, the kind of the flora, the intestinal flora, and the impact the doxy was going to have for that. We started, developing a nutrition routine and having fermented vegetables and taking probiotics and, being very mindful of the effect that was going to have. And, he started working with me in this kind of whole systems, this holistic way, and then after the round of the doxy was over, then we went into this herbal cycle that had like these different layers, a lot of just precision and nuance. So that's what really gave me the appreciation for exactly what you're talking about. And I experienced it firsthand, and I think I got off, compared to some of the horror stories I hear about this thing, I got off pretty easy.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's one of those things where if you don't catch it right away, it can be with you for decades.
Who knows? Yeah. Then you don't file your taxes, you get audited. It's just like your life just spirals. I'm sure actually, I don't mean to make light because, there are people that end up with this like very chronic situation. Yeah. It can gets into your nervous system, you get neuropathy, all kinds of things. And, Richard actually specializes in this because, he works in the Northeast here, and it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So that's very clear how that impacted your life. And And what about your thinking?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. I mean, just in terms of how I do my thinking, I would say this conversation we had in the podcast was was a big influence because right now I'd say like right now there's kind of an elevated moment of sense making. It just seems like the stakes are so high in every decision you make, and kind of navigating these polarities. Like we're talking about, like specifically in this episode with COVID, but on so many issues, right? And I guess, all of us are in a process of trying to become more aware of our bias, and it's constant, but to see someone that's actually sort of embodying that ethic to kind of always seek out a balance or seek out this a rational assessment of all the information that he's seeing, and to really be aware of his own bias and to put a spotlight on it, and to, with his own research, with his own thinking, to like just work against it. It was inspiring. And for sure, since that, my takeaway from that conversation, I do feel like I've been more balanced and just considering different narratives, how I do my reasoning, how I look at research. The other thing that I think is consistent with some of the other people that I've spoken to and hope to speak to on this show is this exploration of what we mean by holistic. That I'm a fan and a practitioner of the Feldenkrais method. And, one of my teachers in that method always says the whole is the context. So, the problem emerges in a part, right? I have some knee pain or something like that. That's what gets me in the door. That's what is calling my attention. But the origin of that knee pain is systemic. It could be the angle of the ankle. It could be some behavior, and the ankle and the hip, and it affects the hip and it affects the lower back. And the whole is actually the context, right? And so this is
knee pain is just like the guy announcing,
yeah,
hey, there's like a whole issue here that'd be really great for you, your being to
fix,
to be aware
to
of,
address,
to address, to align. And I'm just going to be the guy like with the little bugle, like
right,
dun, dun, dun,
like a
dun.
fever. Yeah, great bugle
Thank you.
sound, by the way. But yeah, like a fever, for instance, or this and that, I'd say that maybe is the kind of if we had to distill that worldview or approach that Richard's offering here, this idea of holism or a holistic approach, it's that, and the difference of kind of how the allopathic practitioner approaches it is that, a symptom emerges. And so often we're just quick to suppress that symptom. We want to just make that headache go away. We want to alleviate the pain. So the pain is the signal. Pain is the actual signal. We want to tune into the signal, right? And then let it guide us to an accurate picture of the system, of the whole. What's the function here? What's a picture of ideal function in that respect? And then it's an exploration, as Richard's saying. It's like, okay, what's the diet like? What's the emotional life like? What are this person's relationships like? It's like, I got this blood work back. I have this elevated cholesterol thing. We could just put the person on statins, but what else is going on? Right? It's like, this is just one line in some blood panels. And if I orient my whole approach to healing this person just to change that one marker, then what else am I missing? Right? What am I missing? I think more importantly, what am I missing upstream? That then when I solve that, then I just divert the stream and then it pops up somewhere else.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about the kind of, we're talking about two levels here. One is the holistic on the level of the body, and then also just his incredible balanced reasonableness when he approaches thinking. Something of like, what are the roots of illness in our thinking? And what is the upstream analog of there? Like, how do we address the way in which we make sense of the information, or even the information that we gather and see?
How broad do you want to look? Right? Because then we would say that thinking's happening in a cultural context.
Yes.
It's not just happening by itself. It's happening in a historical, socio-political, economic. It's happening in this context. So where's the real disease? Right? There's already been kind of a narrowing of choices of thought, of action, of what choices can this person, this thing make based on its context. So then, there's just like ever expanding layers of holism there, I think. Yeah. I would say it gets into like education, right? Like, it's like, what is our movement literacy? What's our physical literacy? What's our nutritional literacy? From young, and culturally, like, how do we relate to food? How do we relate to health? How do we relate to the soil? Where, I think Richard kind of hints at this, right? Like, how do we even, what's happening with the soil, the agriculture that's producing the food we eat, right? So, it goes pretty far upstream, I think, by the time it gets to one person's individual health choices.
There's a lot of nested structures. And if we really want to solve it at the deepest level, and we can solve it at the deepest level for ourselves, but if we really want to solve it at the deepest level for our community, we're really swimming up and up through all these other structures and systems.
Yeah. And I think Richard, he doesn't articulate it that way, but I think he says that too. It's like, we can solve these problems for ourselves, and then that kind of ends there, but it's not going to be everything. Mm-hmm. Like, if we don't actually address this in kind of the other, to put it in the integral language, but to solve this in all the quadrants, right? To actually like look and see like what's our community connection with food? Where's the food coming from? How these, I think, there's a tendency to, when we like start to develop health practices, or, to kind of like optimize our experience, or optimize our athleticism, or, whatever, that then we end up doing that in a bubble, kind of isolation. We're not thinking of this sort of whole systems approach. Or I don't want to say we're not, but there can be a tendency to do that.
Well, I'm really grateful you brought us this conversation. It was totally not what I expected, and I love it.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, what'd you expect? I'm curious.
I don't know, just guy talking about herbs. But it was way deep. Yeah. And like you said, he's prescribing doxy to you, or approving of the doxy prescription. He's not just He's not ideologically just committed to like,
That's right.
I'm the tribal herb guy. I like that. We need that.
He's not.
We know we all, I think I could be a little bit less tribal. I think we all could. And just having an example, that to me is heroic, of going through the studies in herbalism and then not being just so tightly affiliated with that. To be like, herbalism good, chemical bad, It's really, it's just so nuanced.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Nate. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll catch you next time. That concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes show. Your hosts were Ankur, Shah Delight, and Nathan Ramos. Special thanks to Pierre for the awesome episode artwork, to DJ Plainview for our theme music, and to our audio producer. If you like the show and you want to support our mission and our growth, here are 3 things you can do. 1. Think of 3 people you know who would enjoy the episode you just listened to, and tell them about it. Call them on the phone, send them a handmade watercolor postcard, or a text, or a link. But whatever, share your enthusiasm. 2, leave a review on your podcast platform. Apparently, having reviews actually works and is a great way for us to get found by new listeners. And 3, get in touch. Let us know how you feel. You can email us at info@10kh.show, follow us on Twitter at 10khshow, or leave a voice memo in this new voice mailbox I set up about how this episode affected your life. That link is in the show notes to this and every episode and should show up on your podcast platform. If not, you can always get it at our website, 10kh.show. Thank you and take care.